judiciary. I want to bring in a member of the Judiciary Committee, Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. Senator, your reaction to this announcement from the president?
Well, Alicia, this is a stunning development. Todd Blanche was President Trump's personal lawyer, and President Trump is very eager to have him installed, confirmed by the United States Senate. And the reason he's not is because of corruption. The Weaponization Fund. In his confirmation hearing, many of us pressed him about this multi-billion-dollar fund set up in a sham piece of litigation in Florida that is designed to allow President Trump and his family to get relief from the IRS and to allow anyone who believes himself to be a victim of DOJ weaponization to file and to receive payment. He would not answer when I pressed him in his confirmation hearing whether or not those who were convicted of assaulting police here in the United States Capitol on January 6th would be eligible for potentially multi-million-dollar payouts. And so even though Todd Blanche and the DOJ has said, oh, no, this weaponization fund is dead. Oh, no, we're not going to move forward with it. What Senator Cornyn and Senator Tillis are demanding is that it actually be in writing, that there be a binding commitment that this is over, and that the potential for the Trump family and Trump businesses to benefit from the IRS release part of this deal also be over. Trump's not willing to do that. So he's going to try and withdraw Blanche until the next Congress. But frankly, I don't think they're going to have a more favorable Congress or Senate to confirm Todd Blanche. He was responsible for the release of the Epstein files, which has been a dumpster fire. He's fired thousands of DOJ employees just because they worked on Trump-related inquiries in the past. And he's weaponized the department, issuing indictments against against New York Times journalists and trying to indict currently serving elected Democrats. So I don't think Todd Blanche has a chance of getting through our committee. And this reveals how deep the corruption is around this weaponization fund, that Trump absolutely refuses to let Blanche sign the document that would actually kill it.
Your assessment of the political realities comports with Senator Cornyn. He just posted this a short time ago. POTUS is mistaken if he believes concerns about the provisions in his tax lawsuit settlement are limited to me and Senator Tillis. Do you think this could actually bring other Republicans out of the woodwork who have been using Tillis and Cornyn as the front men on this?
Yes, I think there are other Republicans weighing in with the White House saying you've got to kill this weaponization fund. Look, every American who's heard that there was this very convoluted special case where the president sued himself and got a multi-billion-dollar settlement says, wait a minute, that's not right. And the settlement is the creation of this $1.7 billion weaponization fund. When the outcry against that was broad and bipartisan, Todd Blanche and the administration said, oh, no, we're not going to move forward. I think what Senator Cornyn is correctly reflecting is that this example of corruption, of self-dealing by President Trump galls even those Republicans who have voted for all of his other nominees.
Senator, the one thing that seems very true here is that the president is very comfortable having acting leads of all of these agencies. He believes that actually gives him more leeway to do the things he wants to do. What are your major concerns, reservations with Todd Blanche continuing on as an acting attorney general?
Well, Alicia, you saw this in his first term. He had lots of folks in his cabinet who were acting for as long as was legally possible. He likes to play people off against each other, to hold things over their head. And Todd Blanche is someone who, although qualified, he was a federal prosecutor for a long time. He served at major law firms. He doesn't have the independence from Trump. He hasn't shown a willingness to stand up to pressure to weaponize the department. So he's going to do Trump's bidding. That's my assessment. That's why I'm a no on his nomination. But that's also led several Republicans to have real concerns about Todd Blanche and whether or not he should be the attorney general. So President Trump thinking that he can withdraw this nomination, wait for the election, and be in a better shape, better position on the other side, I think is counting his chickens before they hatch.
Senator Coons, before I let you go, I want to ask you a question about Jay Clayton. A U.S. official confirms to MS Now that he has not yet been sworn in as the new director of national intelligence. That is despite being confirmed. That official said no date has been set for Clayton to take office, which another official confirms is unusual. So that means Bill Pulte is continuing in his acting capacity. Why would that be, Senator?
So, Alicia, Bill Pulte, who is utterly unqualified to be Director of National Intelligence, is acting as a hatchet man and is firing senior intelligence officials, clearing house, removing people who might resist some misuse of intelligence or the resources of the Intelligence Committee and community, to advance President Trump's electoral interests. Jay Clayton is not as wildly unqualified as Bill Pulte, but I voted against Jay Clayton as well, given his struggle answering questions about independence and how he would lead this department. This is a critical role. It was created after 9/11, and its role is to coordinate intelligence in order to protect the American people. That Bill Pulte, whose single qualification is blind loyalty to Donald Trump, is staying in an acting role is genuinely dangerous.
Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. Senator, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Alicia.